Before the story begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more emotional and surprising stories ahead. And now let's dive into today's story. The saddest part about being abandoned on Christmas isn't the silence. It's realizing the people you loved planned that silence together. I'm Evelyn Carter, 72 years old, and last Christmas, I set the table for 6 people who never came. The turkey had been in the oven since noon. I basted it every 30 minutes the way my husband always liked, even though Frank had been gone almost 3 years. Some habits survive grief. Outside my kitchen window, snow drifted softly across our quiet street in Cedar Falls, Connecticut. The neighbors had wreaths hanging from their porches, glowing lights wrapped around mailboxes, and children dragging sleds through fresh powder. Everything looked warm. Everything looked normal. Inside my house, the candles were already burning low by 6:30. Dinner was supposed to start at 5. Michael had texted me that morning saying traffic might be slow because of weather near the interstate, but he promised they were coming. Vanessa had asked whether I still planned to make the sweet potato casserole Ethan liked. I smiled when I read that message. I even bought the expensive marshmallows he loved, the ones with real vanilla. At my age, you learn to notice small things. You also learn how desperately you cling to them. By 7 o'clock, the gravy had formed a thin skin on top. The rolls had gone cold beneath the towel basket. I stood by the front window holding my coffee mug with both hands, watching headlights pass without slowing down. Every few minutes I checked my phone. Nothing. No calls. No messages. Just silence. The kind of silence that slowly changes shape until it fills the entire room. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe Ethan forgot to charge his phone. Maybe Michael was driving carefully because of the snow. Maybe Vanessa had another migraine. She always seemed to get headaches before family dinners. I walked back into the dining room and straightened the silverware again, even though it was already perfectly aligned. 6 plates. 6 glasses. 6 folded linen napkins. Frank used to tease me about those napkins. Said I treated Christmas dinner like a state banquet. I smiled at the memory for exactly 3 seconds before the loneliness returned harder than before. At 8:15, I finally sat down alone at the table. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked loudly enough to make the room feel even emptier. I poured myself a small glass of wine and tried not to stare at the empty chair across from me. Frank's chair. The one nobody else ever used. Then my phone buzzed. My heart lifted so quickly it almost embarrassed me. But it wasn't Michael. It wasn't Ethan. It was Gloria Bennett from next door. "Honey," she wrote. "I didn't know your family rented that beautiful cabin up in Vermont. Looks fancy." Underneath the message was a social media screenshot. I stared at it for a long time before I fully understood what I was seeing. Vanessa stood beside a massive stone fireplace wearing matching plaid pajamas with Michael and Ethan. There were stockings hanging behind them, champagne glasses on the table, wrapped presents everywhere. The caption read, "Family Christmas Getaway." So grateful for these moments. Family. I looked around my quiet dining room while snow pressed gently against the windows. My candles had almost burned out completely. My family hadn't forgotten me. They had left me behind on purpose. I set my phone face down beside the untouched turkey and sat there without moving for a while. No tears came. At some point you get too tired for tears. Around midnight, I finally blew out the candles and covered the food with foil before carrying leftovers into the refrigerator, one container at a time. The house felt painfully still. Upstairs, the guest room remained perfectly made for Ethan like it always was during the holidays. I turned off the kitchen light and started toward bed when I heard 3 soft knocks at the back door. I froze immediately. Not loud knocking. Just slow. Deliberate. I opened the door a few inches. Cold air rushed inside, carrying the sharp scent of snow and pine trees. Nobody stood there. The porch was empty, but below the steps stretching across my backyard, I saw a line of fresh footprints disappearing into the darkness. And at 6 o'clock the next morning, 2 police cars pulled into my driveway. The flashing red and blue lights reflected across the snow outside my living room window, while I stood frozen beside the staircase still wearing my gray house slippers. For a moment, I honestly thought something terrible had happened to one of my neighbors. Cedar Falls was the kind of town where police cars usually meant someone slid off an icy road or teenagers were caught drinking behind the baseball field. I never imagined they were stopping for me. Officer Nathan Hayes stepped carefully across my front walkway, while another officer remained near the patrol car speaking into a radio. Nathan removed his gloves before I even opened the door fully. That small gesture mattered to me. It felt respectful, human. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked quietly. "I am sorry to bother you this early." I nodded and wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. The cold from outside slipped into the hallway immediately. "Is Michael all right?" I asked before he could speak again. "Or Ethan?" The officer hesitated just long enough for my stomach to tighten. "We are trying to locate your grandson," he said. "We were told he may have contacted you sometime last night." I stared at him without speaking for several seconds. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator motor hummed softly. The entire house still smelled faintly like rosemary and roasted turkey. "No," I finally answered. "Nobody contacted me." It was not entirely a lie. Nobody had called. Nobody had spoken. But those footprints outside suddenly felt heavier in my memory. Officer Hayes glanced past me toward the dining room table, where the folded Christmas napkins still sat untouched beside 6 empty plates. I saw his expression change for only a second before he looked back at me professionally. "May we come in for a moment?" he asked. I led them into the living room while my hands trembled slightly around my coffee mug. The younger officer took notes while Nathan remained standing near the fireplace. "When was the last time you spoke with Ethan?" he asked. 3 days ago, I said. He called to ask whether I was making pecan pie this year. The memory nearly broke me. Ethan had always helped me roll out pie crusts when he was little. Flour everywhere. Music playing too loud. Frank pretending to complain while secretly stealing pecans from the bowl. "Did he seem upset?" Nathan asked gently. I thought about it carefully. "Tired," I admitted. "Distracted maybe. But teenagers usually are." The younger officer exchanged a quick look with Nathan before writing something down. My heartbeat grew louder in my ears. "What exactly is going on?" I asked. Nathan exhaled slowly before answering. "Your daughter-in-law reported Ethan missing around for this morning." Vanessa. Of course it was Vanessa. Even hearing her name in my mind exhausted me. She had spent years perfecting the art of sounding concerned while making everyone else feel unstable. By the end of family gatherings, people usually apologized to her even when she was the one creating tension. It was a talent, honestly. "She said Ethan disappeared sometime during the night after an argument," Nathan continued. "She also mentioned he has come here before when upset." I looked down at the coffee trembling softly inside my mug. Vanessa had not mentioned abandoning me on Christmas. She had not mentioned the cabin photos. She had not mentioned that nobody in my family had bothered calling me once. Interesting how carefully people edit their stories when police become involved. "Mrs. Carter," Nathan said carefully, "did you notice anything unusual overnight?" My eyes drifted toward the backyard window automatically. Snow still covered the yard in smooth white layers except for the faint trail of footprints leading toward the trees behind my property. I could still see them from where I sat. Long, uneven. Hurried. Something cold settled deep in my chest. Because suddenly I remembered something else. Around 11:30 the night before, just before the knocking started, I thought I heard someone crying outside. After the officers left, the house felt even quieter than before. It is strange how silence changes once fear enters it. The same grandfather clock still ticked near the staircase. The same snow still drifted outside my windows. But suddenly every sound seemed heavier. I stood at the sink holding my untouched coffee while staring at the footprints behind my house. The snow had softened around the edges now, but the trail was still visible leading toward the woods beyond my backyard fence. Ethan used to play there when he was little. Frank built him a bird feeder one summer beside the old maple tree near the creek. Ethan could sit outside for hours with binoculars around his neck pretending he was some kind of wildlife explorer. Even at 16, there was still a softness to him that did not belong in modern life anymore. He noticed things. Quiet things. The kind of child who apologized when he accidentally stepped on ants. Around 9 that morning my phone finally rang. "Michael." I stared at his name glowing on the screen before answering. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. I could hear noise behind him. Car doors. Wind. Vanessa talking somewhere nearby. Mom, he finally said, sounding exhausted. Have the police been there? Yes, I answered calmly. They left about 20 minutes ago. Another pause. Did Ethan contact you? The question sounded rehearsed. Careful. Like someone standing too close beside him while he spoke. No, I said. Not directly. I heard Vanessa immediately in the background. Ask her about last night. Her voice carried sharply even though she was clearly trying to lower it. Michael cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom, Vanessa said Ethan has been upset lately. She thinks maybe he came by your house. I looked down at the kitchen table where one of Ethan's unopened Christmas presents still sat wrapped in red paper beside my purse. A sketchbook. He loved drawing old buildings and winter streets. Last spring he spent an entire afternoon sketching the abandoned train station downtown, while other teenagers were glued to their phones. Your wife seems to think many things, I replied quietly. Michael sighed heavily. Please do not do this right now. That sentence settled over me like cold rain. Please do not do this right now. Not Mom, are you all right? Not. I am sorry we never came last night. Not. Even Merry Christmas. Funny how betrayal rarely arrives dramatically. Usually it enters a room wearing exhaustion and impatience. Where are you? I asked him. At the cabin? Silence answered first. Then came the sound of a car door shutting. We came back early this morning, he admitted. Of course they had. The perfect Christmas photos had only been for social media. Another polished little performance. Michael, I said carefully, why did nobody tell me you were leaving town for Christmas? He did not answer immediately. I imagined him rubbing his forehead the way he always did when stressed. Finally he muttered, things have been complicated lately. Complicated. Such a convenient word. It covers lies, guilt, cruelty, and cowardice all at once. Before I could speak again, another memory surfaced suddenly and clearly enough to make my stomach tighten. 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had come over after school while Vanessa attended some charity luncheon. He sat at this exact kitchen table quietly stirring hot chocolate long after it had gone cold. I remembered asking whether everything was all right at home. He looked toward the hallway first, almost instinctively, before answering softly, Grandma, have you ever felt like somebody can smile at you and still hate you at the same time? At the time I thought he meant some girl at school. Now, standing alone in my kitchen while snow fell steadily outside, I realized he had been trying to warn me. By noon the snow had stopped, leaving the neighborhood covered in that strange brightness winter mornings sometimes create after a storm. Everything outside looked clean and peaceful. Inside me nothing felt peaceful anymore. I spent the morning replaying old memories while washing dishes nobody had used. 6 dinner plates. 6 untouched wine glasses. Every clink of porcelain against the sink sounded louder than normal inside the empty house. Around 1 o'clock, Gloria Bennett knocked gently on my front door carrying a foil tray of cinnamon rolls she had baked that morning. Gloria and I had lived next to each other for nearly 20 years. She was one of the few people left who still remembered Frank before the cancer. Before the hospitals, before grief quietly rearranged our lives. You look pale, she said softly the moment I opened the door. Have you eaten anything? I stepped aside to let her in. Gloria placed the tray on my kitchen counter, then stopped when she noticed the untouched Christmas table still sitting exactly as I had left it. Her face changed immediately. Not pity. Something worse. Understanding. They really did not come, she whispered. I shook my head once and looked away. Gloria removed her coat slowly and sat beside me at the kitchen table without speaking for a while. That was something I appreciated about her. She never rushed to fill silence with meaningless comfort. Finally she asked, what did the police want? I told her about Ethan being missing, about Vanessa blaming emotional problems, about the questions. Gloria listened quietly, though I noticed her mouth tighten the moment Vanessa's name came up. I never trusted that woman, she muttered carefully. She smiles too perfectly. I almost laughed at that because it was true. Vanessa always smiled like someone posing for a brochure. Controlled. Measured. Never natural. Even during funerals she somehow looked camera-ready. Michael changed after he married her, Gloria continued. You know that, right? Of course I knew. Mothers always know. We just spend years pretending not to. I remembered the first Christmas after Michael married Vanessa. We were decorating Frank's tree together, while Christmas music played softly in the living room. Michael reached for the old handmade ornaments Ethan loved, but Vanessa stopped him immediately. "Those look dated," she said lightly while holding up a box of matching silver ornaments she had purchased. "Let us make things look elegant this year." Elegant. That word stayed with me all these years because afterward, one by one, familiar things slowly disappeared. Frank's old decorations. Ethan's messy homemade crafts. Family recipes that took too long. Loud board games. Spontaneous laughter. Vanessa replaced everything with polished perfection. Matching outfits. Expensive vacations. Carefully staged photographs online. Somewhere along the way, warmth itself disappeared from my son's house without anyone admitting it. Gloria interrupted my thoughts gently. "Did Ethan ever say anything strange to you?" I hesitated before answering. Then I remembered the Christmas card. I had almost forgotten it entirely. 3 weeks earlier, it arrived in the mail separately from the family card Vanessa usually ordered every year with smiling studio photos. Ethan's handwriting covered the envelope unevenly like he had rushed. I stood immediately and walked toward the hallway table where I kept unopened mail and old greeting cards stacked neatly in a wooden basket. My fingers trembled slightly while searching through them. Bills, coupons, church flyers. Then finally I found it. A plain red envelope with Ethan's handwriting across the front. Gloria watched quietly while I opened it again. Inside was a simple card with snowflakes on the cover. The message itself was short. Too short. "Merry Christmas, Grandma. Thank you for always listening to me when nobody else does." But beneath the message, written smaller near the bottom corner almost like an afterthought, was a second sentence I somehow missed before. "If something ever feels wrong, trust your instincts about Mom." The entire kitchen suddenly felt colder. That afternoon, the temperature dropped fast enough for fresh ice to form along the edges of my driveway. Gloria had just left when another car pulled up outside my house. This time it was not the police. It was Michael. I watched from the front window as he stepped out slowly, shoulders tense beneath his dark winter coat. For a second he simply stood there staring at my house like a man trying to prepare himself for bad news. Then Vanessa climbed out from the passenger side wearing cream-colored boots and a long white coat that looked too elegant for the situation. Even now, she somehow appeared ready for a holiday magazine cover. Michael knocked once before letting himself inside with his old spare key. Vanessa followed behind him carrying an expression that looked carefully practiced somewhere during the drive over. Concern mixed with exhaustion. "Mom," Michael said quietly, "how are you holding up?" I almost answered honestly, before realizing how absurd the question was. My family abandoned me on Christmas, my grandson was missing, and police had searched my home before sunrise. But somehow everyone still expected me to behave calmly enough to make them comfortable. "I am managing," I replied instead. Vanessa stepped forward immediately and touched my arm lightly. "Evelyn, this whole thing has been devastating." Her voice sounded smooth and warm, but her eyes never fully softened. They scanned the room constantly instead. The table, the hallway, the backyard window, looking for something. "Has Ethan contacted you since the officers left?" she asked. There it was, straight to the point. Not fear. Not grief. Control. I studied her face carefully before answering. "No," Vanessa nodded too quickly. "He has been emotionally overwhelmed lately," she continued. "Teenagers can become unpredictable." Michael shifted uncomfortably beside her. I noticed dark circles under his eyes. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. "Overwhelmed by what?" I asked quietly. Vanessa folded her hands together perfectly. "School pressure. Social anxiety. Normal things. Normal things. Ethan once spent 2 hours helping an injured bird outside my porch because he could not bear hearing it struggle in the cold. There was nothing reckless or unstable about that boy. Sensitive, yes, but not dangerous. Not impulsive." My eyes moved toward Michael. "Did you really spend Christmas at that cabin?" He looked down immediately. Vanessa answered before he could. "We were only there briefly." Briefly. Another polished little half-truth. "Interesting," I said softly, because the photos looked very convincing. Silence spread through the room instantly. Vanessa crossed her arms. This is not the time for sarcasm. No, I replied calmly. Apparently Christmas Eve was not the time for honesty either. Michael finally spoke up then, rubbing his forehead anxiously. Mom, please. We already feel terrible about missing dinner. Missing dinner. As though they had accidentally forgotten a dentist appointment instead of leaving an old woman alone on Christmas, while posting smiling vacation photos online. Before I could answer, Officer Hayes appeared at the front door again. His expression looked tighter this time, more serious. We found something, he said quietly after stepping inside. Vanessa straightened immediately. Michael looked pale. Nathan removed a folded paper from his coat pocket. The rental cabin owner confirmed nobody stayed overnight yesterday, he explained. Your family arrived around noon, stayed less than 2 hours, took photographs, then left before sunset. The room became completely still. I looked directly at Vanessa. For the first time since she entered my house, her expression cracked slightly around the edges. Just enough for me to finally see the panic underneath. Michael stared at her in confusion. Vanessa, he said slowly, you told me you booked the cabin for the whole weekend. She turned toward him too quickly. I did not think details like that mattered right now. But they did matter. Because suddenly the entire Christmas story they created no longer made sense. And somewhere deep inside me, a terrible realization began quietly unfolding. Ethan had not disappeared from a happy family vacation. He disappeared after something went very wrong. After Officer Hayes revealed the truth about the cabin, nobody spoke for several long seconds. Snowlight spilled softly through the front windows while the heat hummed quietly through the vents above us. It should have felt warm inside the house. Instead, everything suddenly felt brittle, fragile. Michael sat heavily on the edge of the couch staring at Vanessa like he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Why would you lie about staying there? He asked quietly. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. Because I knew how this would look, she snapped. I was trying to avoid unnecessary drama. Unnecessary drama. Ethan missing. Police searching neighborhoods on Christmas morning. And somehow Vanessa still sounded more irritated than frightened. Officer Hayes remained calm, though I noticed his attention sharpen every time Vanessa spoke. Mrs. Carter, he said carefully, we also learned there was an argument yesterday afternoon before Ethan disappeared. Michael looked exhausted suddenly. Older. It was nothing, he muttered. Vanessa turned toward him immediately. Michael. Just his name. But the warning inside it was unmistakable. I had heard that tone before at Thanksgiving 2 years earlier when Ethan accidentally mentioned college savings during dinner, and Vanessa quickly changed the subject before anyone could ask questions. Back then I ignored the discomfort in my chest because mothers spend too much time protecting peace instead of protecting truth. Officer Hayes glanced between them both. According to witnesses at the rental property, Ethan left upset after accusing someone of stealing money. Silence again. Heavy this time. Michael rubbed both hands over his face slowly before finally whispering. He found some paperwork. Vanessa took a sharp breath. Michael stopped talking. But he continued staring at the floor. A few weeks ago, Ethan checked the balance of the trust account Dad left him for college. My stomach tightened instantly. Frank created that account before he died. He wanted Ethan protected no matter what happened after he was gone. There was less money than there should have been, Michael admitted softly. I looked at Vanessa. Her jaw tightened immediately. You are not seriously entertaining this nonsense, she said coldly. A teenage boy misunderstood financial statements. But Michael was no longer looking at her. He said withdrawals had been happening for almost 2 years. 2 years. My mind moved backward instantly through birthdays, vacations, expensive handbags, home renovations Vanessa somehow always managed to afford despite constantly complaining about finances. Suddenly little details rearranged themselves into something uglier. Who had access to the account? Officer Hayes asked carefully. Vanessa answered too fast. Michael handled all of that. Michael looked up immediately. No, I did not. The room became very still again. I could almost hear the old refrigerator motor running in the kitchen. Vanessa managed most online banking, Michael admitted quietly. After Dad passed away, I let her organize everything because I was overwhelmed. Of course he did. Grief makes people surrender responsibility just to survive. And manipulative people know exactly when to step in. Smiling, Vanessa stood abruptly. "This is unbelievable," she said sharply. "Our son is missing and suddenly everybody wants to turn me into some criminal because of accounting confusion?" Officer Hayes remained composed. "Nobody is accusing you of anything right now." But his voice sounded different now. More alert. More careful. Just then his phone buzzed. He stepped aside near the front window to answer quietly while the rest of us sat trapped inside unbearable silence. Outside, snow began falling again in slow drifting sheets across the neighborhood. Christmas lights still blinked peacefully along nearby rooftops like nothing terrible could possibly happen in a place this quiet. Then Nathan lowered his phone slowly and turned back toward us. His expression had changed completely. "Search teams found Ethan's backpack," he said. Michael stood immediately. Vanessa went pale. "Where?" she whispered. Nathan hesitated before answering. "Near the river trail about 3 miles outside town." The moment Officer Hayes mentioned the river trail, Michael grabbed his car keys so fast they slipped from his hand onto my hardwood floor. The sound echoed sharply through the room. Vanessa immediately moved toward him, placing both hands on his arm like she was trying to steady him, but he pulled away without looking at her. That small movement told me more than words could. Doubt had finally entered my son's mind. Real doubt. "I am coming with you," Michael said to Nathan. The officer nodded once. "Search teams are still out there. We will contact you as soon as we know more." Vanessa turned toward me suddenly. "Evelyn, if Ethan contacted you for any reason, you need to tell us now." Her voice had lost its softness completely. Underneath the polished calm, fear was beginning to show through. I met her eyes evenly. "If Ethan trusted me with something, there is probably a reason." Her expression hardened instantly. Michael looked exhausted. "Mom, please," he whispered. "This is not helping." But I noticed something important then. Neither of them asked whether I was frightened. Neither of them apologized for leaving me alone. Somehow my pain still remained invisible inside this family, even while everything else was collapsing. After they left with Officer Hayes, the house fell silent again except for the faint hiss of snow against the windows. I stood in the living room staring at the empty driveway long after their cars disappeared. Then suddenly I remembered something Frank installed years ago after several break-ins happened around town. Security cameras. Old ones. Not fancy modern systems connected to phones, but simple cameras with recordings stored in a small locked box downstairs near the furnace room. Frank used to joke that he trusted raccoons more than people. I hurried downstairs carefully, my knees aching from the cold. The basement smelled faintly like dust, cedar wood, and old paint cans. Christmas decorations sat stacked neatly against one wall beside Ethan's childhood sled. I found the metal recording box exactly where Frank left it years ago beneath the workbench. My hands trembled while opening it. Most of the system barely worked anymore, but one small monitor still flickered weakly when I pressed the power button. Grainy black and white footage appeared across the screen. The timestamp read December 24th. My heartbeat quickened immediately. I rewound slowly through static and empty snowfall until finally I saw movement near the backyard camera. 11:37 p.m. A figure appeared near the back fence wearing a winter coat with the hood pulled low. Thin. Tall. Ethan. He climbed carefully through the side gate and crossed the backyard quickly while glancing behind him several times. Even through the poor camera quality, I could tell he was upset. He stopped near my porch steps and bent forward with both hands against his knees like he was trying to catch his breath. Then something happened that made my stomach tighten instantly. Ethan pulled out his phone. A few seconds later, he froze completely while staring at the screen. Even without sound, I recognized the look on his face. Fear. Real fear. He answered the call slowly. He barely spoke during the conversation. Mostly he listened. Then after less than a minute, he wiped his face roughly with his sleeve and looked back toward the woods behind my property, like someone deciding whether to run or surrender. Finally he turned and walked away from my house without knocking on the door. I watched the footage 3 times before noticing one final detail. Right before Ethan disappeared off camera, headlights flashed briefly through the trees near the road behind my property. A dark SUV. Waiting. My blood ran cold because I recognized that vehicle immediately. Vanessa drove a black Lincoln Navigator. My hands were shaking so badly by the time Officer Hayes returned that I nearly dropped the recording device trying to carry it upstairs. Nathan listened carefully without interrupting while I explained what I found. Then I played the footage for him twice in complete silence. The grainy black and white screen reflected faintly across his face while Ethan appeared near my porch again, frightened and alone in the snow. When the black SUV headlights flashed through the trees, Nathan leaned closer immediately. "Can you confirm that vehicle belongs to Vanessa?" he asked. "I would recognize that car anywhere," I answered quietly. Nathan exhaled slowly and stood near the fireplace for several seconds without speaking. Outside, daylight had already started fading into early winter darkness even though it was barely after 4 o'clock. Christmas lights blinked softly across neighboring houses while somewhere down the street children laughed in the snow. The contrast felt unbearable. "Mrs. Carter," Nathan finally said, "I need you to understand something carefully. None of this proves Vanessa harmed Ethan." "But it proves she lied," I replied. "Yes," he admitted. "And right now that matters." His phone rang almost immediately after that. I watched his expression shift while listening. First concentration, then surprise, finally relief. "Where?" he asked sharply. He turned away toward the front window, lowering his voice, but I still caught enough words to feel my knees weaken. "Motel. Highway 14. Safe. Alive." When Nathan hung up, I already knew. "They found him," I whispered. He nodded once. "Ethan checked into a roadside motel late last night using cash. The manager recognized him from the police alerts this afternoon." Relief moved through me so suddenly it almost hurt. I lowered myself slowly onto the couch while pressing one hand against my chest. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, I could breathe normally again. "Can I see him?" I asked. "Soon," Nathan said gently. "But first we need to speak with him alone." Less than an hour later, Michael arrived at my house again. Alone this time. The moment he stepped inside, I knew everything had changed. His face looked hollow, exhausted, like someone who had finally seen the full damage inside his own life. "They found Ethan," he said quietly before I could speak. "I know." He nodded once and stared down at the floor. Snow melted slowly from his boots onto the entryway rug Frank bought years ago during some ridiculous post-Christmas clearance sale. Strange what details grief makes you notice. "He told the police everything," Michael whispered finally. I said nothing. Michael sat heavily at the kitchen table where untouched Christmas cookies still remained on a tray beside the window. "Vanessa took money from the trust account," he admitted. "Not just once. For years." Every word sounded painful for him to say aloud. "Ethan discovered it while helping organize tax papers for college applications. They fought about it yesterday morning." I closed my eyes briefly. Somewhere deep down I think I had already known. Not the details, but the shape of the truth. "Why did Ethan come here last night?" I asked softly. Michael swallowed hard before answering. "Because Vanessa told him if he exposed everything, she would make sure nobody believed him. She said she could convince people he was emotionally unstable." The room fell silent again except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock nearby. "He came here because he trusted you," Michael said quietly. "But before he knocked on the door, Vanessa called him. She told him police would think he ran away because of mental health issues if he involved you." I looked toward the dark backyard beyond my kitchen window where fresh snow now covered Ethan's footprints completely. Gone. Erased. "So he left," I whispered. Michael nodded slowly while tears filled his eyes for the first time since all this began. "Mom," he said brokenly, "I should have protected both of you." And for once there was no excuse left in the room. 1 year later, snow was falling again outside my kitchen windows while another Christmas dinner warmed quietly in the oven. The same house, the same table, the same soft glow from the tree near the fireplace. But everything felt different now. Honest, maybe. Smaller too. Funny how peace sometimes arrives only after illusions finally collapse. Ethan sat at the counter peeling potatoes while humming softly to himself. He had grown taller over the past year, though there was still gentleness in him that life had not managed to destroy. Community college seemed good for him. He spent most mornings studying architecture and most evenings sketching old buildings in town, just like he used to as a child. Sometimes I caught him smiling to himself while drawing. Those moments healed something inside me more than he probably realized. "Grandma," he called from the kitchen island, "do you still put cinnamon in the sweet potatoes?" "Always," I answered while checking the turkey thermometer. "Your grandfather would haunt me if I stopped now." Ethan laughed quietly. Real laughter this time. Not the nervous kind he carried last Christmas. The kind that comes when a person finally feels safe again. Upstairs, I heard Michael helping carry boxes down from the attic. He moved slower these days. Quieter too. Divorce changed him in ways even grief never had. After the investigation uncovered everything, Vanessa accepted a financial settlement agreement and left Connecticut entirely within months. Nobody really talked about her anymore. Not because we hated her. Mostly because exhaustion eventually replaces anger when betrayal lasts too long. Michael still carried guilt heavily though. I saw it in small things. The way he apologized too often now. The way he checked on me constantly during storms. The way he lingered awkwardly after family dinners like a man trying to rebuild trust brick by brick without knowing whether the foundation could still hold. Some wounds never disappear completely. They simply become quieter with time. Around 5 o'clock, Michael entered the kitchen carrying Frank's old ornament box. He stopped when he saw the dining room table already set. 4 plates this year instead of 6. Smaller. Simpler. Real. His eyes drifted toward the empty chair at the end of the table. Frank's chair. I still kept it there every Christmas. Not because I could not move on, but because love deserves a place to sit even after death. Michael cleared his throat softly. "Mom," he said, "I found Dad's old camera upstairs." He handed it to me carefully. The leather strap was cracked from age, but the weight of it instantly transported me backward through decades of birthdays, camping trips, school concerts, and Christmas mornings before life became complicated. Frank used to photograph everything. Ordinary moments especially. Pancake breakfasts. Wet mittens drying near heaters. Ethan asleep on the couch after opening presents. He always said ordinary days mattered most, I whispered. Michael nodded slowly. I think he was right. Snow continued falling softly outside while Christmas music played low from the living room radio. For the first time in years, nobody felt tense. Nobody performed happiness for photographs. Nobody forced perfection into places where honesty belonged instead. Dinner finished cooking just after sunset. Ethan carried the rolls carefully to the table while Michael poured iced tea into glasses beside the candles. I looked around the room quietly before sitting down. 1 year ago, I believed abandonment was the deepest loneliness a person could feel. I was wrong. The deepest loneliness is sitting beside people who stopped seeing your pain long before they stopped loving themselves. But sometimes life gives families one final chance to become truthful again. Not perfect, just truthful. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently before we began eating. Outside, snow covered the neighborhood in silence once more. But this Christmas, the silence no longer felt empty. And that's the end of today's story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.